She was 21 and sleeping in the back seat of a Buick that did not run. No address, no key to any door, no name on any lease, just a small black hymnal that had belonged to her grandmother and 6 soft dollar bills she had earned scrubbing the floor of a diner in Cairo, Illinois, and with that $6 she bought a flooded country church on Old Pilcher Road in Alexander County, Illinois. In a bend of the Cache River bottoms that had not heard a Sunday hymn since 1971. The pews were rotting where the river had reached them. The roof had caved on one side, and a single shaft of gray light came down through the hole onto the altar stone like a finger pointing. But what nobody knew was that hidden in the wall behind that altar, sealed up in a hollow chamber the size of a steamer trunk, was something that would change her life forever. Before we go on, if you love stories like these, take a moment and subscribe and tell us in the comments where you are listening from tonight. We love to see how far these stories travel. She had grown up with the smell of beeswax and old hymnals and river damp, with the smell of pine pews oiled twice a year and the smell of cold stone in winter and the smell of coffee on a Sunday afternoon in her grandmother's kitchen after the service was finished. Her name was Wren Elizabeth Coley, and she had been born in a 2-room house a half-mile from that same church, and her earliest memory was of her grandmother lifting her up onto the 3rd pew from the front, the one that had her great-grandfather's initials cut shallow into the underside of the armrest. She remembered the way the light came in green through the one stained window that had survived a hailstorm in 1948, and she remembered the way her grandmother's hand felt on the back of her neck when the singing started, steady and warm, like a stone left in the sun. On summer evenings, when the heat would not leave the floorboards and the cicadas sounded like saws in the trees, Eola May would open the kitchen windows and let the river smell come through the screens. Wren would sit at the table with her elbows tucked close, because her grandmother did not allow elbows to sprawl during supper, and she would listen while Eola May named the people in the old photographs one by one. There was Tobias in a black coat too heavy for the weather standing beside the church before the steeple was painted. There was Sarah, the wife he had lost, in a tintype so faded that her face seemed almost made of fog. There were women in white collars, men in work shirts, children with bare feet, all of them held in place by the same small building at the edge of the river. Eola May never spoke of the church as if it belonged to the past. She spoke of it as if it had only stepped into another room. When rain hit the roof, she would pause and say, "That is the sound it made on the church roof before the flood." When Wren dragged a chair across the kitchen floor, Eola May would say, "That is how the pews sounded when the men shifted their weight during a long sermon." Little by little, without knowing it, Wren learned the building before she ever understood loss. She learned that a porch step could remember a foot. She learned that a window could hold the color of a morning long after the glass was gone. She learned that some families passed down money and land and some passed down instructions. She remembered, too, the smell of the river when it rose. The bottoms flooded most springs, and most springs the water stopped at the second step of the church porch and went no further. But in 1971 the water came up over the porch and into the nave and stood 3 feet deep in the pews for a week. And after that week the small congregation, what was left of it, did not come back. The doors were closed. The roof began its long surrender. And Wren, who was not yet born, would not see the inside of that building until she was 4 years old and her grandmother carried her through the side door to show her something, though Wren could no longer remember what. The church had been built in 1871 by her great-great-grandfather, a man named Tobias Hiram Coley, who had come up the Mississippi from New Orleans with a pocket of carpenter's tools and the memory of a wife buried in Tennessee. He was 38 years old when he reached the Cache Bottoms, and he was alone, and he had nothing but a horse and a wagon and his hands. He bought the 4 acres on Old Pilcher Road for $12 in gold from a widow who was selling off her late husband's holdings, and he set about clearing the land with an axe and a crosscut saw, sleeping under the wagon for the first summer and in a brush lean-to for the first winter. He built the church in 3 years, working alone for most of it, and the stone for the foundation he hauled himself from the limestone outcrop 2 miles east, 1 wagon load at a time. The altar he carved from a single block of that same limestone, and he set it against the east wall so that the morning sun would strike it first when it came through the window he planned for the gable. He cut the pews from white oak that he felled and milled himself on a saw pit he dug behind the building, and he planed every board by hand. He raised a steeple with a block and tackle and a rented mule, and on the day he set the small iron bell into its cradle he wrote in his journal that he had wept, though he did not say why. He had no congregation yet. He had only the building. The first service was held on Easter Sunday of 1874 with 7 people in attendance, 4 of them his own neighbors and 3 of them strangers who had walked up the road because they had heard the bell. By 1880 the church had 30 members. By 1900 it had 80. By 1920, when Tobias was an old man of 87 and near the end of his life, the church had 120 members and a small graveyard behind it with 16 stones, and Tobias was buried under the 17th in the spring of 1921, with the bell he had hung tolling for him while his great-grandson, a boy of 9, pulled the rope. That boy grew up to be Wren's grandfather, and he in turn married a woman from the next county over named Iola May Bennett. And it was Iola May who taught Wren everything Wren knew about that church and about the trade of keeping a small country sanctuary alive in a county that was losing its people 1 funeral at a time. Iola May was the church's last sexton and its last organist, and in the final years, its last living member, except for 1 elderly cousin who lived in a nursing home in Mound City. She had kept the keys after the 1971 flood, and she had kept them in a tin box on the top shelf of her pantry for 41 years, and she had let nobody but Wren see what was in that box. By 8 Wren could tune the small reed organ that Iola May had brought home from the church on a sled the winter after the flood. By 12 she could mix the linseed oil and the turpentine and the beeswax in the proportions Iola May had taught her, 3 to 1 to a quarter, and she could rub down a length of pew oak until the grain came back up like a fish rising. By 15, she could read the church's burial book, which Iola May kept wrapped in oilcloth in the bottom of a cedar chest. And she could read her great-great-grandfather's hand, the steep slanted hand of a man who had learned his letters in a Tennessee schoolroom in 1840. By 18, she could sing the 4 old hymns that Iola May said her own grandmother had sung in that church before the flood, and she could sing them without the organ, in the low, untrained voice of a woman who has learned a song from another woman across a kitchen table. Iola May taught her 3 things, and she taught them slowly, over years, the way a person teaches a child to plant a tree. The first thing was, a building is not stone and wood, it is the breath of the people who used it, and as long as one person still knows its breath, the building is not dead. Iola May said this on a winter afternoon when Wren was 12, with the wind hitting the kitchen window and the kettle steaming on the stove, and she said it without looking up from the pew board she was oiling on the table. The second thing was, a key is a promise. If somebody gives you a key, you have promised them something even if neither of you spoke a word about it. Iola May said this on the day she let Wren hold the tin box for the first time, and she set it with both hands flat on the table on either side of the box, as if the box itself were the thing she was swearing on. The third thing was, nothing that has been blessed is ever truly lost, it has only been put down for a while. Eola May said this on the last Easter she was strong enough to walk, when she and Wren had gone together to the church and stood inside the broken doorway and looked at the altar stone, which the river had not been able to move. And Eola May had put her hand on the cold limestone and said the words, and then put her hand on the back of Wren's neck, the way she had done when Wren was small. Eola May died in October of Wren's 19th year, on a Tuesday morning with a thin frost on the kitchen window and the kettle still cold on the stove. Wren found her in the chair by the window where she did her reading, with the burial book open on her lap to a page she had been working on, and Wren did not cry. She closed the book and she set it on the table and she finished, in her grandmother's hand as best she could match it, the entry her grandmother had been writing, which was the entry of a cousin who had died 2 days before in the nursing home in Mound City. And then she sat with her grandmother until the sun moved across the floor and the neighbor came. After the funeral, people told Wren that grief came in waves. That was not how it came to her. It came in small chores that no longer had an answer. It came when she reached for the second cup without thinking. It came when she heard the kettle begin to sing and turned to call into the next room. It came when she woke before dawn and thought she had heard Eola May moving softly through the house in her stockings, only to remember that the hallway was empty and would stay empty. The world did not break open all at once. It thinned day by day until Wren could see straight through it. The great-uncle from Carbondale arrived in a pressed brown suit and spoke in the careful voice of a man trying to sound kind while counting value in his head. He said the house was too much for a girl to manage. He said the taxes had to be handled. He said Eola May would have wanted things settled. Wren knew none of that was true, but she was 19 and tired and had no paper with her name on it. By the time she understood that the auction company had cleared the pantry, the tin box was already gone. She searched the trash pile behind the house until dark, pulling through cracked plates and curtain rods and wet cardboard with her bare hands, but the box was not there. For weeks afterward she carried the little black hymnal in the pocket of her coat the way another person might carry a house key. The cover had gone soft from years of hands. On the inside front page, Eola May had written Wren's name in blue ink, and beneath it, in a smaller line, "Keep the song where you can reach it." Wren read that line on bus benches in the diner bathroom, in the Buick when the windows filmed over with "Called." It was not enough to save her, not in any practical way, but it kept one part of her from going completely silent. The house went to a great-uncle in Carbondale who had not seen Eola May in 30 years and who sold it within the month. The pantry tin with the keys was thrown out by the auction company before Wren got there. The cedar chest with the burial book was sold to a dealer who did not know what was in it. The reed organ went for $40 to a man who wanted the wood. Wren was 19, and she had nothing but the small black hymnal her grandmother had pressed into her hands the last week, and a job at a diner in Cairo and a room she rented above a hardware store for $70 a week. 2 years later, the hardware store closed and the room went with it, and Wren moved her clothes into the Buick that her grandfather had left in Eola May's barn, and the Buick did not run, and that was her address for 4 months. If these stories are reaching you tonight, take a second to subscribe. It truly does help us keep making them. And tell us in the comments, was there ever a quiet place in your family where the singing was kept alive, that you carry with you from a woman who is no longer here? The 4 months in the Buick taught her how slowly a person can disappear. At first, the other waitresses asked where she was staying, and she gave half answers. Then, they stopped asking. She learned which gas station would let her wash up before dawn if she bought coffee. She learned to park under the broken security light behind the feed store because nobody bothered her there. She folded her uniform every night and slept with it under her coat to keep it from wrinkling. On the coldest nights, she held the hymnal against her ribs, not because paper gave warmth, but because it gave weight, and weight reminded her that she was still in the world. She was not a girl who dreamed of being rescued. Iola May had not raised her that way. Wren made lists on the backs of diner receipts, room deposit, bus fare, new shoes, dentist, coat. She crossed off what she could and carried the rest. But every list ended, without her meaning it to, with the same 2 words, Old Pilcher. She did not know why she kept writing them. The church had no roof worth mentioning and no floor worth trusting. There was no sensible future in it. Still, those 2 words followed her through every shift, through every plate she carried, through every quarter she counted into her palm at the end of the night. She read about the auction in a free paper somebody had left on the counter of the diner, a thin yellow sheet from the county that listed tax-delinquent properties. The church was on the 3rd page, 2 lines with a starting bid set at $6 to cover the filing fee. Nobody else came. The auction was held on a Wednesday morning in the basement of the courthouse in Thebes, and the only people in the room were Wren, the auctioneer, and an older clerk with white hair behind a wooden desk. The night before the auction, Wren slept badly, though sleep was not the right word for what happened in the Buick. She drifted, woke, listened to trucks on the highway, and drifted again. Just before dawn, she dreamed of Viola May standing at the church door with the tin box under one arm and the black hymnal under the other. In the dream, her grandmother did not speak. She only looked at Wren as if she were late for something that mattered. When Wren woke, the inside of the Buick was gray with morning, and her breath had clouded the glass. She counted the $6 3 times. The bills were limp from being handled, 2 ones torn at the corner, one folded so long it would not lie flat. She smoothed them over her knee and put them in the hymnal. She nearly did not go. A woman can be poor enough that hope itself begins to feel wasteful. She sat behind the wheel of a car that could not move and told herself that a flooded church would not feed her, would not shelter her, would not give her a bed. Then she remembered Iola May saying that a key was a promise, and she stepped out into the cold morning with the hymnal under her coat. The clerk looked up when she gave her name. He went still for a long moment, and then he said Coley, Tobias Coley's people. He said it not as a question. Wren nodded, and the clerk stood up and walked to a storeroom behind his desk and was gone for what felt like a long time. He came back with a single iron key on a leather thong, and he set it on the counter between them. "We have kept this in the drawer since 1971, he said. "Your grandmother left it with us the year of the flood, in case anyone ever came for it." Wren slid the 6 soft bills across the counter. The clerk folded them, and as she turned to go, he said, quiet, "The place has been waiting." She drove the road out to Old Pilcher in a borrowed pickup that smelled of hay and motor oil, with the iron key in her coat pocket and the small black hymnal on the seat beside her. The road ran straight for 2 miles through bottomland fields that had been corn once and were now in soybeans, and then it bent left along a slough where the cypress knees stood up out of the water like small dark people, and then it climbed a low rise and the church came into view. It was smaller than she remembered. The white paint had gone almost entirely, and what was left was the silver of weathered cypress siding, and the steeple still stood, though the bell was gone, taken in 1971 by somebody who had thought it would not be missed. The roof had caved on the north side, and through the hole she could see, even from the road, the gray beam of one rafter. The front door was off its hinges and leaned against the inside wall. The graveyard behind, the 17 stones and the ones added after, stood in the long grass with the goldenrod just beginning to bend toward October. She walked up the path. She set her hand on the doorframe the way her grandmother had done, and she stood for a long moment in the broken doorway, and she looked at the altar at the far end, which was still where Tobias Hiram Coley had set it in 1872, against the east wall, with the morning sun coming down on it through the hole in the roof rather than through the window he had planned. The pews were rotted to gray, lace. The floorboards were soft. The plaster on the walls had fallen away in great sheets and lay on the floor like broken bread. Inside the church, the silence did not feel empty. It felt crowded. Wren could hear the soft tick of the cooling roof metal, the small skitter of a field mouse under a pew, the drip of old rain from somewhere in the broken north wall. Dust hung in the light in slow golden strands. The air smelled of river mud, dry rot, and something faintly sweet that might have been the last memory of beeswax in the wood. She took one step, then another, and with each step the place gave back a sound. Not a welcome exactly, more like recognition. Near the third pew from the front, she stopped and crouched. The armrest was split and dark, but when she turned it over with both hands, she found the initials her grandmother had shown her long ago, shallow and crooked, THC, cut into the underside by a pocket knife. She ran her thumb over them and felt the years under her skin. It was a small thing, no bigger than 3 letters in ruined wood, but it struck her harder than the caved roof. The people who had made this place had not been stories. They had held knives, missed nails, gotten blisters, sung off key, worried over money, and still built something that stayed long enough for her to come back to it. She walked the length of the nave, slow testing each board with her weight, and she came to the altar and she set her hand on the limestone the way Eola May had set hers on the last Easter she had walked. The stone was cold and dry. She had come to take the building apart. She had come to pull the oak from the pews and the cypress from the siding and sell what she could for lumber and live on it until she could find another room. She had thought she was buying wood. But standing there with her hand on the altar stone, she felt a small unevenness in the limestone at the back, a fine seam running vertical down the rear face of the block. A seam too straight to be natural. She crouched. She ran her fingernail down the seam. The mortar in it was crumbling and gray, the original mortar from 1872, and underneath it her nail caught on something that was not stone. She found a pry bar in the bed of the borrowed truck. She came back. She worked the bar into the seam, slow, the way Eola May had taught her to work a stuck pew board. With patience, and not with force, and after perhaps an hour the back face of the altar moved. It was not a single block. It had been carved as 2 pieces, the front face and a thin back plate, and the back plate had been mortared in to seal a chamber inside. The chamber was the size of a steamer trunk hollowed out of the limestone, and the air that came out of it when she pulled the plate free was dry and cold and smelled of cedar. She lit the kerosene lantern she had brought from the truck, and she set it on the floor and she looked in. There were 3 things in the chamber. The first was a leather-bound book the size of a family Bible, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with a length of twine that had gone dark with age. The second was a small cypress chest, no larger than a bread box, with brass corners and a brass lock that had no key. The third was a single envelope of heavy cream paper, sealed with red wax, set upright against the back wall of the chamber, with writing on the front of it in the steep, slanted hand she had been reading since she was 15. She lifted the book first. It was a register of every person who had ever been baptized, married, or buried in that church from 1874 to 1971, and she found Tobias's hand on the first pages, and her great-grandfather's hand after that, and her grandfather's hand after that, and Iola May's hand on the last pages, and her own name on the baptismal page for the year of her birth. Written in Iola May's hand, Wren Elizabeth Coley, daughter of the line, April 14. She lifted the cypress chest. It was heavier than it looked. She set it on the altar, and she worked the brass lock with the pry bar, gentle, and the lock gave. Inside, wrapped in linen that had yellowed but not rotted, were 42 gold double eagles from the years 1865 through 1871, stacked in 2 neat columns. Each coin the size of a large button, each one stamped with the standing figure of liberty. Under the coins was a single twist of paper in Tobias's hand that read, "For the keeping of the house." Spend it only on the house. The gold did not glitter the way gold does in stories. It shone quietly, with the deep, dull warmth of something that had spent a century in the dark. Wren picked up one coin and felt its weight settle into the center of her palm. $20 once, a fortune once, a roof now, maybe, a door, a floor that would not give under a foot. She thought of the Buick and of the room above the hardware store, and of all the ways the money could save her if she let it. Then she saw the twist of paper and read the line, and the coin in her hand seemed to grow heavier. She did not count them then. She set the chest down. She lifted the envelope last. The wax was the deep red of dried blood, and it bore the imprint of a thumb pressed in while it was soft. The writing on the front said, "To whoever finds this, in the year of our Lord they are needed." She broke the seal. The letter was 4 pages long, on the same heavy cream paper, written in the steep hand she knew. She sat down on the altar step and she read it aloud in the empty church, slow, because there was no other way to read a letter from a man who had been dead 100 years. To whoever finds this, in the year of our Lord they are needed. My name is Tobias Hiram Coley, born in Greene County, Tennessee in the year 1833. And I have raised this church with my own hands in the year of our Lord 1872, in the bend of the Cache River, in Alexander County, Illinois. I have set this letter in the wall, behind the altar on the day before the consecration, with the burial book, and with a portion of gold that I have carried with me from New Orleans. And I have sealed the chamber with my own hand, and with the prayer that it not be opened until it must be. I have built this house alone, with the memory of my wife, Sarah Coley, buried in Tennessee in 1865, and with the hope that the singing in this bend of the river will outlast the singing of any one mouth. I have no children yet. I do not know if I will have them. If I do, and if they have children, and if any of those children comes one day to this altar in a season of need, then this gold and this book are for them, and for the house. Spend it only on the house. The house is the thing. If you are reading this and you are not of my line, then you have been sent by Providence, and the gold is no less yours. Spend it on the house. The house is what I have left behind, and the house is what asks to be kept. The singing does not belong to me. The singing belongs to whoever opens their mouth in this bend of the river and lets it out. I do not know what year you will read this. I do not know what will have happened to the country, or to the river, or to the bell I have hung this morning. I know only that a building is the breath of the people who used it, and that a key is a promise, and that nothing that has been blessed is ever truly lost. It has only been put down for a while. Keep the house. Keep the singing. Keep the door open. Signed this 12th day of April, in the year of our Lord 1872, Tobias Hiram Coley, builder, of Old Pilcher Road, Alexander County, Illinois. Wren read the letter twice. Then she set it down on the altar, and she set the burial book beside it, and she set the cypress chest beside that, and she did not cry. She walked outside into the long grass behind the church, and she walked to the 17th stone, the one that read Tobias Hiram Coley, 1833-1921, builder of this house, and she put her hand on the top of it. And she stood for a long time while the October light came down through the cypresses and the golden rod bent in the small wind. The 42 gold double eagles were appraised 3 weeks later in Cape Girardeau by a numismatist named Harlan Voss, who handled each coin under a jeweler's loupe and was a long time looking at them, and who set the value of the cachet at $38,400, with several of the 1865 coins worth a great deal more than face. He offered to broker the sale himself. Wren thanked him and took the coins back. Harlan Voss tried to explain the market to her. He spoke of condition, rarity, mint marks, auction houses, insurance, private buyers, and the danger of selling too quickly. Wren listened because Eola May had taught her that respect did not cost anything. But when he said again that she could use part of the money to start over somewhere better, she folded the twist of paper and put it back into the chest. Somewhere better had always sounded to her like somewhere with less memory. She did not want less memory. She wanted a roof strong enough to hold it. She sold only what she had to sell at first, then waited. She got receipts for every board, every nail, every hinge, every sheet of roofing tin, and kept them folded in the back of the register with Tobias's letter. When the first contractor laughed and told her the church was not worth saving, she thanked him and did not call him again. When the second said it would be cheaper to bulldoze it and build a new chapel-shaped room, she walked him to the door. The third man, the roofer from Olive Branch, stood in the nave for almost 10 minutes without speaking. Then he touched the altar stone with 2 fingers and said, "This one has bones." Wren hired him before he named his price. She spent the money slowly, the way Eola May had taught her to spend anything, in small, clean increments and only on what the house asked for. She put a new roof on the north side first, hiring a man from Olive Branch who had roofed 3 of the old country churches in the county and who would not take more than the work was worth. She had the cypress siding patched where the river had eaten it. She had the floorboards lifted and replaced with white oak from a small mill in Pulaski County, and she oiled them herself, 3 to 1 to 1/4, the way her grandmother had taught her, until the grain came up like a fish rising. She rehung the front door on new hinges. Word traveled the way it travels in a small county. By November, an old man named Earl Pickens had walked up the path with a brass bell wrapped in a quilt, the original bell, which his father had taken down in 1971 to keep it from being stolen, and which Earl had kept in his barn for 41 years, waiting. He set it on the porch, and he said, "This belongs at the top of the steeple." He would not take money for it. By December, a widow named Hattie Lou Brand had come up the path with a stack of 9 hymnals that had been in her attic since the closing, and with a cake of beeswax wrapped in brown paper, and with the recipe for the oil mixture written out in a hand that Wren recognized from the corner of the burial book as the hand of a woman who had been the church's sexton in the 1950s. By the first Sunday in Advent, with the bell rehung and the door rehung, and the floor oiled and the roof tight. 11 people stood in the small nave at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and sang the first of the 4 old hymns in the low, untrained voices of people who have learned a song from somebody across a kitchen table. Wren stood at the front with the burial book open on the altar, and she sang in the voice Iola May had taught her. And she did not cry, but she set her hand on the cold limestone, and the limestone was no longer cold. That's the thing about the houses our grandmothers teach us to keep. They are not stone and wood. They are the breath of the people who used them. And a key is a promise, and nothing that has been blessed is ever truly lost. It has only been put down for a while. Wren Elizabeth Coley was 21, and she had been sleeping in the back seat of a Buick that did not run. She had $6 to her name, and she spent it on a flooded country church on Old Pilcher Road in Alexander County, Illinois. It was the best $6 she ever spent. If this story kept you company tonight, leave a candle in the comments for the women who taught us to keep the singing alive. See you in the last warm light of the day.